Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Holcomb. I'm the Director of Visual Arts at the Center for the Arts at Virginia Tech. And I'm here to introduce our fall exhibitions. Today is a Seeing and Reading, which brings together the work of Josephine Halvorson and Dana Frankfort, two artists who approach text in painting from very different directions. Dana invents language in the studio, dissolving words into painterly gestures and atmosphere, while Josephine discovers text in the world, painting it directly on site at the scale of the encounter. Together, their work reflects on what it means to look, read, and interpret, reminding us that words as images carry not just meaning, but memory, place, and feelings. I'm delighted to welcome Josephine Halvorson. Josephine makes paintings face-to-face with objects in their environment, translating subtle shifts of light, texture, and atmosphere into portraits of presence. Halvorson attended the Cooper Union School of Art, Yale, Norfolk, and continued her education, receiving her MFA from the Columbia University School of Arts. Solo exhibitions include Ungekit Museum of Art, the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, the ICA Boston, and the Storm King Art Center, among others. A Guggenheim Fellow and the first American received the Rome Prize at the French Academy in Rome. Since 2016, Halvorson has served as a professor of art and chair of graduate studies in painting at Boston University, and she currently lives and works in Western Massachusetts. Welcome, Josephine. So you had a chance to walk through the exhibition and to see your and Dana's works together for the first time, right?
Yeah.
And so what were your impressions, kind of seeing your works paired with Dana's?
Well, first of all, I should say that I'm really happy to be here and really happy to see them in person, because I think both of our work is meant to be experienced in a more embodied way, in a more physical way. That's, of course, how I come upon objects in the world in my own work. And Dana's paintings are so physical in their making, gestural and more muscular. So I think seeing them in person, I was struck by all of their material qualities that really give a sense of presence to them in person.
Mm-hmm. And so you've spoken of your work as like following hunches or riddles as an exploratory process, especially when you're observing found text. And similarly, you've written on Dana's work following an approach of curiosity and interpretation through intuitive text. Can you discuss like this crossover between Dana and your work, despite their distinct visual appearances?
Yeah, well, I don't want to speak for Dana, but she's an artist I've admired for so long, and I've looked at her work for many years, and she's someone, as I was saying before, kind of, you can sense where her hand was in the making of a painting. I mean, it's really almost, it leaves a trace as much as it makes a mark. So there's that record of her own movement through it. And it seems to me as a viewer of her work that she kind of almost archaeologically discovers language in that excavation of the surface of her work through addition of color or subtraction of gestures that move forward. And I think of her as finding language in the painting. And it's not just a material, physical thing, it's also through color. So the resonances, like, I think my favorite painting out there is the painting called Probably, which has this silver text of the word probably against a very rich purple kind of background. And it's such a funny painting because what does probably even mean? Or what doesn't it mean? There's so much to it. And to find it in a painting, and it's a modestly sized painting too. It's not, exclaiming itself and, announcing itself in any kind of adamant way, and yet it is, it truly feels like you come across it, and I think that's where the humor in her work comes through a little bit as well.
Yeah, and also one of the things that I saw or I learned as talking with both of you is how much landscape comes into play is with you on site and with her growing up in Houston with the fog and the mugginess of the horizon line. Yet you paint, as you said, at arm's reach and that direct proximity. And could you like expand on this, like how important that proximity is to be like face to face with these objects in the site?
Yeah, and I think it's well, two things I want to say. The first is about landscape in Dana's work. Is I drove down here with my mom, who's here, from Western Massachusetts yesterday and today, and just all the billboards and the landscape and how you drive by it, the kind of speed of it. I think of that speed, that whirring by, is related more to Dana's work of billboards and signage and kind of the way that, in a peripheral sense, psychology registers of language and feeling. My work is also peripheral in the sense that I encounter things that are on the edges of my own daily life, stuff that isn't particularly front and center. I mean, like everyone here, I spend a lot of time on the screen doing my job and working and, and of course painting and everything too, but it's actually the stuff on the edges of my life on the edges of life more generally that things start to appear. So for instance, this painting that we're looking at, this was a sign that my mom actually painted in 1990, and then it was up for decades, and then someone hit it. There was a car collision with the sign, and the sign fell over. And it was only when the sign fell over that I noticed it. Sorry, Mom. I mean, I did notice it, but it was only when in its destruction that it kind of called out to me, and that's, when I decided to paint it as it lay there on the ground. And when I look at something like this, whether it has language or not, it is, as you say, within arm's reach, something close by and proximate. So it's as if I can feel what it is through the painting of it. So I often use the expression in my work, seeing what it feels like, as if painting allows me to see what it feels like to be that sign. Like, what did it feel like to be painted? What did it feel like to witness every day and every night and every day and every night since 1990? But also, what does it feel like to be it now? And it's not just materially what it feels like, but in a broader cultural sense. Like, what does the post office feel like today, right? So there are ways that just by looking, and I was just speaking with Professor Patel about this too, but like just by describing something up close, it opens up onto all of these this imagination of what language and what objects can be, what they hold, what they might hold, what they have held. And it's really only through that translation, through painting, that really emerges for me.
And just speaking on the sign, I mean, the sign is there like to communicate, and you painting a sign that's fallen to where it's like removed from its function. Do you feel like there's any parallel that to the process of painting or art itself? It being what is it its function?
Totally, and in this one, I thought by painting it in perspective, it was pretty obvious that I was looking down at it. It was receding in space. But then, even throughout its painting, it started kind of levitating up, where it looked as if it was kind of, was it rising? Was it falling? And I guess painting, especially still life, and which is the genre that I feel most close to, has this quality of being both alive and dead. I think art historically, there's so many paintings of food or still life paintings of things that are in a state of decay or in a state of coming back to life. And so I would argue painting is no different in that it's not inert, it's not something that has no feeling, but it also isn't exactly breathing it doesn't have life in the way that we typically define life. So I think the sign is a metaphor absolutely for painting itself. Is like, is it resting there? Is it inert, or is it active? Is it alive?
And I just wanted to speak on, because you can't help but notice color when you're walking into the show and looking at both of your work and the approach. But I understand it's like you're painting from observation, so the color is dictated by the light, but you still have feelings about color. And would you, speak on that just a little bit? Because one of the things, especially when it comes to light, because one of the things that I really noticed that kind of captivated me or made me stop about the work was the fact that you could see the brushwork, you could tell there was speed in its approach, yet it somehow rendered this natural environment, and how do you recognize it except through the color, the tonal changes?
Yeah, color is a very interesting and constantly shifting, I guess, material, you'd say, or concept, or even phenomenon. I mean, it's really complex. And I think we've come to think about color as very much in the space of a noun, like purple or silver or green. But when I am painting, I'm not really thinking of it in those terms, although, of course, I do have all my paints, which are pigments that are suspended in some kind of binder. And for all the painting people here, you have such an amazing teacher in Amanda Lechner, who knows so much about pigments and painting. So there's like a material reality to it, but I think of when I'm in the act of making a painting and looking at something, observing it and translating it, it feels more like a verb to me. Like, what is it doing? And often the color is reflecting something else. It's I think in this enlargement here, maybe there's some indication of kind of like the blue of the sky or the purple colors that are in the shadows that are reflecting somewhere, like there's sky everywhere. So that's always in, when I'm painting in daylight, that ultraviolet light seems to be all around. So, as someone, I do think of my work as a kind of relational practice. Like I'm in relation to an object, and which is in relation to a painting. We're all kind of in relation to each other, but specifically when it comes to color, it's relative. So what is this color relative to something else, relative to something else? And it is very active, and it's not so much, it moves from the nameable pigment or paint color to what it's doing and how it's relating to its environment.
And so, I mean, speaking of that, and since we're using the word painting so much, I remember in like the past that you said you don't like to refer to yourself as a painter, and you have a really strong relationship with photography because it's very tied to your part of work, but also with the essence of time and capturing place. How, I mean, do you still feel that way, or do you refer to yourself as a painter, or would you just say, oh, I'm an artist?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I remember in that Art 21 having a big conversation about possibly editing that out because I knew it would come back to me. But it stayed in.
It's forever.
And it's forever. I guess I was saying that in the context of like the way that I approach making art, and how I came up in the world was informed that, in the sense that for me, art was something always that happened through encounter and chance encounter in particular, and I love the serendipity and kind of coinciding of things. Like I think I would define painting as the coinciding of forces all together, like my own will, the environment, the conditions of making art, and of course color, materials, history. We all kind of coincide together on the surface of something. And that, I think, is better demonstrated by other disciplines, like perhaps like photography, or even social practice, or performance art, or land art. There are other traditions that I do feel a kinship with that are outside of kind of more studio-based practices. Not to say that if you make a painting in a studio, it doesn't also have all of the chance encounters and coincidences and the kind of effects of its own circumstance at play. It's just that it's more, that's a more private kind of experience that happens, I think, for an artist, and isn't quite as legible to a viewer.
Yeah, and that is also reinforced by where you choose to work as an artist, because it's much different to be a plein air painter in New York City, whereas a lot of the artists need that quiet and peace, like that individual space in order to create. Whereas you like to be like in the elements. And speaking with photography of how you create all these notes and everything as a way for your works, but also how does like being in the elements, translate into the paintings? Because just with the just saying with like the mass painting, your notes say like there was a really loud train going by, and how does that affect, or how does that get embedded into your painting process?
I mean, I think that it's all there, and that when you look at a painting of mine, I think that it does have a certain kind. I think it does go beyond its own image, for the most part. But it's kind of bigger philosophical question of how do you translate experience into art, and I don't know. I mean, I do think that a lot of it has to do with attention and the kind of way that your body exists in any kind of space at any given time. But for me, I like to be in the mix of everything going on. I like feeling wind on my skin, and the light changing. I like feeling a part of something changing all at once, because ultimately the painting is responding, is in relation to that change. But the question of like how responsible do I have to be as an artist to kind of tell the story of that experience narratively is something that I have questions about, and I don't really have answers for. But it's something that I've been trying out through photography, through writing. And I'm not trying to kind of pull off a sleight of hand by saying, can you believe I made this painting with the force of a train going by, But I also know that I could never have made this painting if I hadn't been where I was, making it. And I mean, I technically probably could have, but I would have probably been very bored, and it never would have happened.
And so the Polaroids serve more as a documentation of like notes, like a sketchbook?
Yeah, like field notes, and more kind of in service to a viewer than in service to myself, probably.
Mm-hmm. And how about the other parameters of like time? It's all of your work painted in from dawn to dusk?
Well, when I was an oil painter for many years, I made paintings kind of while the paint was wet, which was about a day, because it was more like taking a cast of something and it was curing over the course of a day. And when it dried, it was like over. It's like you can't recast cement, it cures at a certain point. But when I moved to water-based media in 2018, I was inspired by fresco, and I had lived in Italy and was looking at frescoes really up close, which inherently have a relationship to time. Like there's a section you can make while it's damp, which is called a giornata, which means the day. And but then also in my kind of journalistic temperament of or chronicling time, I wanted something where I couldn't take it back. So these strokes, this gouache paint, which is an acrylic-based gouache paint, it dries instantly. Like I make a mark and it holds itself there. I can't revisit it. I can't revise it. And in that sense, it's kind of notational, and it aggregates into a certain kind of chronicle of time. So this painting we're looking at was probably about a month and a half or something of going there, and not every day, but and things happened along the way. I started it in the fall when it got quite cold, and it was in this, along the train tracks where the wind blew, and it blew over the painting and damaged it. And so I had to repair it. And then it was like winter. And then I had to wait till the summer to go back out there again. And then I spent another month or so. So, you know, these are like long form, I do think of them as kind of longhand, long exposure paintings that just build up until it feels like what the thing felt like, what I felt like, what the experience felt like.
Yeah, I noticed too, it's like looking, because I was more familiar with your work in oil.
Right.
And seeing these acrylic and gouache the first time, one, it's just how you were able to still have that same sense of gestural like feeling, but there's a lot more flatness on surface, and also it to me it just kind of reminded me of like more of the printmaking classes with the cross hatching and the drawing to build up form as well. So, and you know, I did like include like an example of one of your earlier oil paintings to kind of talk on the subject that you were just speaking on, right. of what caused that change, you know, from, because even with the oil paintings, I can still, the surface is more built up, but also just the drying times and the slowness. And I remember you saying something about, in one of your interviews, about concealment and how you didn't want to conceal your process.
Right. Yeah, I've wanted it all to be like on the surface, and I mean, I think I often think about my newer work as almost like the X-ray of my older work. Like if it had some kind of, can you see the gestures more visibly in that you can in this work, like you're seeing here in the gallery, and that thicker paint was a byproduct of the material itself and my own gesture, my own hand, but it wasn't really, it was something that was extraneous to what I was trying to do. And I think that it was like I either would have to have become more of a painter like Dana Frankfort or become more of a painter like you're seeing out here. I think I just hit a certain kind of end to that way of working, painting in a day. There were other things I wanted to explore. I wanted to spend more time with things. Also, you know, I never thought about this, but like when you get older, you know, a day is not the same amount of time as when you're younger. You know, like a day when I was 25 was like, you know, it was a good chunk of time. And 20 years later, it's like, a day is just like that, you know, and I'm sure it's going to get even shorter. So I kind of, you know, I've been asking myself the last few years, like, ideally, what does it look like to have this practice? How much time would I want to be in front of something every day? I mean, it's really quite, you know, tiring. And to bring all your materials set up, pack them all up, go home, bring them all back, set them up, you know, a lot of things can go wrong. It's dependent on the subject itself, but I will say that it became pretty clear that a day was just not enough of amount of time. And then, okay, so then I could make it bigger, I could make it looser, but there was just more that I was seeing. The other thing I didn't know starting out is that you get better. And the more you do something, and like I was really, you know, at the maximum of my ability level, you know, when I made this painting. In the same way that, like, you know, the painting I was working on 2 days ago, I'm at like the absolute maximum of what I can do technically, and you just keep on doing that, and then it turns out you can actually do more. The more you stick with it, which is like a very basic thing, but you know, I never thought about that when I started out. So, so this is a way that holds my attention in terms of the challenges that I want and seek for myself too, technically.
Are you already thinking about what painting an acoustic now?
Yeah, right.
No, so the other thing I kind of wanted, I mean, that's interesting to me because I would think oil would be slower, and you have and you would take more time with the day painting, and whereas you're with a quicker medium, more fresco like, it's more drawn out as a process. So I, you know, going back to like your subject matter or your choices in your search for these, everyday objects. And could you tell us more about like your decision-making process and what you find and you choose as your subjects?
Well, some of them I have known for a very long time, and there are a couple subjects in this show that have been a part of my life for, for as long as I can remember. Like this radio has been in and around my periphery since I was a child, and then all of a sudden it just kind of seems like the right subject, for whatever reason. And it's very complicated reasons. Like I don't understand my relationship to subject matter that much, I will say. There are certain motifs that recur. Like the next image I think is a found memorial. This is a roadside memorial that I came upon, on the side of the road, and I didn't know the person for whom the memorial had been set up. But although I did, over the course of making the painting, meet the person who made the memorial and learned a little bit about the subject of it. But, I had just lost a parent, and it was during COVID. So, this was on my mind, memorials and how we commemorate them and what goes into it. So a lot of it is stuff that's going on in my own life. I've had some medical, health issues that have manifested through, the subjects I've found. For instance, like tree roots that have been gripping a stone. You could say it's a painting about like nature, but I think it had more to do with like growing fibroids in a uterus. So, it's like how you encounter subjects, I think is a very complex, as an artist, it can be a very complex and multifaceted set of decisions that are not necessarily always conscious, and whether it's something brand new to me, like that I might just stumble upon, or something that I've seen, like the sign that I mentioned early on, decade after decade, and then but only notice it. I mean, the type of seeing that we do, the type of noticing, is really quite diverse on a, in many ways. How can something that you notice and you see every day all of a sudden appear to you? That's strange. And how can something that you have never seen before feel familiar? These are questions that, that guide my own, maybe not questions, but these are kind of principles that guide the permission I give myself to be drawn to something. I used to say that I spend most of my time as an artist not talking myself out of painting something of a subject, because it's very easy to say, oh, I've done this before, this will read like this is really silly, this is cheesy, this is, this has been done, whatever it is, and just to kind of swat that the very kind of faint voice that is ringing out, in there to do something. And that's why I say hunches or riddles, or, I do try to make space for hunches, something more spiritual, something that is easy to intellectually dismiss or, or rationally kind of argue with, and yet might actually be something worth listening to. So I try to really honor that, and it's, and see where it goes. Chances are I don't find out what it really is about until much later. Like, for instance, if I don't mind, it's just because my mom's here, so I'm going to talk about my mom, but that painting of the sign, I think it was about, my mom retiring, or what it meant to retire. So it's like, it's a sign, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah, I think most of the time artists try to find ways not to talk themselves out of something, and it's just also just like with finding that subject matter, to where, I mean, with the way that you were just talking about it, that it kind of creates that challenge that you were saying. It's like, oh, well, if I know something so well, or I do something every single day, then I get too good at it, and the curiosity. Right. Wait. So, and one of the things is just like keeping yourself active, and also just to show a parallel with the fact that you are a teacher, and an artist. Do those two roles intertwine with you? Do you, like your conversations with students, does that in a way feed into the work with the way that they look at things and the way that you look at things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a big part of my life, and I think it is a really vital part of my work as an artist too, in so many ways. But yeah, this curiosity thing, I think that is something that I always hope for myself and hope for my friends and my students too. It's just like, can you make space to be curious about something? And it's really hard. I mean, there's so much to worry about in the world. There's so many demands on us to, financially and socially, and in terms of our health and well-being and people we love and caretaking, and it just goes on and on. It's like, how can you make space to be curious, and how can you deal with the privilege of having even a minute to just have your thoughts wander and be full of wonder about something, especially something that might be as in terms of its utility, maybe not so evident like a painting, but I think it's a great responsibility to be an artist, and to hold that space for even the smallest of things. So so that is something that, or the biggest of things. It's just it's pretty awesome to be in and among artists day after day, through teaching and through my colleagues too, who are, and in a wider sense, art education, to kind of all be grappling with all these things in the world and still find a way to see through it to make art. So, I mean, that's a very broad, way to describe it, but it's, it's a chance to really hash out some of these bigger issues of our time together.
Mm-hmm. And also the artist, if you're on site or you're in the studio, it's an act of solitude, and having a community or collaboration kind of keeps these moments fresh in a way through their contrast.
Yeah, we're all alone together.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just kind of in the summary of going back to this conversation between you and Dana, what would you, I know you just walked through the show, you're just seeing it together for the first time, but what do you hope, like viewers, audience, like walking in and seeing these two works, these two artists, two bodies of works in conversation might take from it?
Well, one of my favorite things about painting is how it celebrates difference. The same material or same histories in someone else's hands and someone else's hands can be so totally divergent, so totally different, and that is a really good thing. And yet they can also have so much in common. I mean, Dana and I have known each other a long time, and so when you reached out to both of us to do a show together, it was such an amazing, special moment that someone could see something shared in our work, even though they might look very different initially. And I will say the writing that Brian did on the show is like perfection. It's so good because it really gets to what it is our work does, and that has like almost never happened before in my life as an artist, and both of us feel the same way. And so I guess for someone to come into the show, it is reading and seeing, so I would encourage you to read Brian's words as well as see the work, but to know that even at first glance they might appear different, that's a good thing, and also that there's something in common there is also a good thing. I think Dana and I are both finding our way through paint and through color and a practice to make sense of the world that we come across. And in both of our practices, I feel like this show really brings that out and highlights it in a way that is that I personally am very happy with. I also think that different kinds of speeds of painting, of looking, is something maybe those of you all here might respond to. But I probably would just defer to you to learn about what you're all feeling and experiencing and noticing in the work. But I would expect that a certain kind of a different approach to speed and looking and psychology is really, present in the variety of work on view.
Thank you. Josephine's being overly generous with the way I write. But also, too, is like the writing comes, the storytelling comes from a conversation with the artist. In the first drafts, everything, I completely missed all the landscape references in Dana's work, which she pointed out, and also misquoting her. So it's not, it's a process. But I paint over those, so you all see that. And yeah. So, at this time, I would kind of would like to also, final point with how all this came together, because I think it's interesting with not only with Josephine and Dana's show, but also with Claire Grill and Margot Ogden's show, and having these two exhibitions in parallel because of the conversation and the inter-artist dialogue. So I actually was introduced to Dana's work through Margot, and that was how I remembered, because I was familiar with Josephine's work, but I saw that Josephine had written on Dana's work a couple of times, and then I was thinking, well, there has to be some commonality and similarities even in these disparate visual approaches, and the fact that they both use text and image, even though you have a lot of paintings that do not feature text, that we chose a selection to where those relationships would be front and center. And Margot and Claire, I almost showed them about 10 years ago. So now I get to close that chapter in my life. So, thank you, Josephine. I really appreciate it. I wanted to give the last couple of minutes for questions to the audience for Josephine, if anybody has any. Savannah?
Sure. So I see you have very interesting relationships with objects in the material world, and when I was looking through and reading the material about you, I was really struck by your use of Polaroids. I've been taking Polaroid photography for over a decade, so I thought that was unique. But a lot of your work, you're reflecting on kind of these ephemeral objects or collections that you find out. So I wanted to ask, do you consider yourself a collector of objects in a different way? Because I know from Polaroids that can quickly amass, and so yeah, you're creating these paintings, you're creating a material object from the experience and also the documentation. So I just wanted to ask kind of relationship with personal objects.
Thank you for saying that, and I'd love to learn more about your Polaroid practice. It's an interesting timestamp to have. So in a way, it's collecting that moment, as much as the Polaroid itself. Funny enough, the more paintings I've made and the more art I've made, the less I want to own. So I try to not collect anything, and I used to think of myself as really a very, bare necessities person. And then I realized that actually is not the case at all. I was just very organized. So it was, it appeared, streamlined, but it wasn't. So, I collect art books. I have all the letters anyone's ever written me. And I have a fantasy of someday going through digital photos. But if anyone here has any guidance about that, please let me know. But it is funny how in the digital world we accumulate so much, and then it's really daunting to figure out how to go through it. During the pandemic, I went through a lot of my stuff, and I think that my relationship to organization and storage is really related to my sensibility as an artist of chronicling and archiving things. And one thing I think about in painting is it's like everything in its place and a place for everything. That's how it feels, when making, when it comes to brushstrokes and what I notice. But but I would say that my best form of collecting comes through painting. And again, the instant photos are more of a gesture towards kind of documenting the experience of painting for the purposes of someone else seeing it more than myself, because I feel like the paintings remember better than I do. You know, they remember. It's a reservoir of memory, and my father had Alzheimer's, and I saw what can happen in terms of the loss of memory. And so not only is a painting for me something that can kind of locate myself in place and time, or my own ability, or what's going on in my life, but it can also, there's a relief that I feel that it can somehow be held in an object that I don't have to hold on to, you know, in my own mind as much too. So anyways, I'm getting older. That's something that's been on my mind a little bit too. Thanks.
Donald?
To the extent that your objects are symbols, then they're not just personal. It's making, I see it as making commentary. If you want to comment about that. Also, to some extent, it seems to me there's a mix of objective and non-objective in your work, and I would appreciate hearing about that too.
Thank you. I'm really glad you brought both of those points up, because there is a real politics to my work, in that all the subjects that I paint they pretty much are free. You know, they are not, and by free I mean anyone could see them. Anyone could, I mean, I do have my personal associations with some of them, of course, like I've shared a little bit tonight. But by and large, they're there for the taking. They're there for the looking. And so encountering them is an act of exercising my own kind of freedom to be there and look at something that is in itself free. There is no real value, you know, to these things inherently necessarily. And so as symbols, or as kind of archetypes of objects that are in the world, you know, I am drawn to things that make themselves available to anyone. And then your second point was about
Mixing objective and...
oh yes, objective and non-objective. Yeah, I've explored that. I made a body of work called On the Ground for several years, which had the painting surrounded by a frame that I also made, and in the frame I included rocks and, you know, material from the sites where I was working. And I was thinking a lot about subjectivity and objectivity as working together to create a more truthful account of reality. I think it was in this kind of post-fact, post-truth kind of moment about images where I realized that my practice of looking at something and observing it up close, I mean, I can really say that it was there, you know, that it happened objectively, you know, like I have no doubt in my mind. This is not it's not just that is visually there, but it's not moving either. If it moves, I can tell that it moves. I'm right there to watch it, and I'm I'm a watchful painter in that way. So I feel a sense of assurance that I saw everything at a time when I feel almost no assurances about anything I look at, you know, in terms of imagery or information, you know, in the information age. It's really hard to know what to believe in and what's true and what's not. So I think that, you know, there is an aspect of my practice that, and other bodies of work have gotten to this more closely, that is about that, the power of like an objective account, that I don't expect someone else to be able to see my painting and say, oh yeah, you know, she was faithful to this completely, you know, she has this is, because I'm not even sure I believe in objectivity at all, you know, or subjectivity at all either. But there's something about the mix of the two, which I think people maybe who are in journalism, you know, actually probe that really well. it's got to be a kind of mix of both to give some fuller account, of reality. And that's something I'm really interested in this practice of observation, of, witnessing, of, just simply being there with something else over a period of time until you know it to have been true. Thanks. I hope that answers.
Yeah, I also switched back to your posting, like image where you did a bunch of paintings on trespassing and whose land was this, and referencing the "This Land Is Your Land" song of the lyric that was cut out.
That's right. Yeah.
Speaking with the political and just the certain other messages that are behind, like your subjects that you choose. Does anybody else have any other questions for Josephine? Donna?
On your way driving here, did you find a landscape or an object that really caught your attention for future projects? Maybe?
I wish. If you have suggestions, maybe I can come back to Blacksburg and be painting. Not really, but I'm always on the lookout, and it's really interesting because I taught for a little while in Tennessee and Knoxville, and I went down the similar route in Route 81 down, and I've taken it a few times in my life, and I love this part of the country, and so I'm always looking for reasons to come back, but I mean, it's from the perspective of a car, it's such a distant view, and it's something that is bigger questions about kind of region specificity and regional, culture, also kind of where we are as a country. The last time I actually drove down here was right after the election. I was driving to Florida, and this was just about 6 months ago, or I guess maybe close to a year ago. So just kind of also revisiting these different moments in my life, my own perceptions of the country, But thanks. I wish I had a better answer in terms of an object.
We have time for one more question. Margaret?
I'm just so fascinated to hear about your process of really spending the time with the subject that you've chosen each time. And I wondered, when you feel a work is finished, do you ever feel a sense of loss of not being in front of that three-dimensional object anymore?
I don't, but I love to visit them, and see where they're at. And sometimes they disappear, and sometimes they're still around. The access sometimes changes to them, and one thing, going back to what Brian mentioned in terms of trespass, that's a big part of the practice, where my own ability to access subjects changes over time based on culture or my own body or my setup or the subject itself. So it's interesting over time to kind of know that there might have been something that I now don't have access to. A fence has been built. It's, a property's been sold. A mine is now active that wasn't, or, et cetera. So I don't feel a sense of loss so much as it's a great way to mark change and transformation, both inside me and also in the world in a broader sense.
Thank you, Josephine. Appreciate it. So next Thursday at 3 p.m., we will have another artist panel with Claire Grill and Margot Ogden. But right now, if you have another question for Josephine, we have a reception from 4 to 6, and you are all welcome to join. Thank you.